So after at least a dozen comments asking me to revisit it, I've finally gone back to SWORDSOUL KASHTIRA to revisit the deck after the new KASHTIRA support to see if it's actually worth revamping or playing. And I'm going to be perfectly honest with you, I absolutely loved it. I took it in here. We've got a couple of really nice replays I want to show off. We're going to talk about the deck at the end for anyone who is ultimately unfamiliar with SWORDSOUL KASHTIRA, talking about some of the new cards in particular. But this deck and its playstyle just fits very, very well. It works in the same sort of capacity as the Evil Eye KASHTIRA video that we did a wee while ago. The wee card will be up top if you want to check that out later on. But basically, the entire concept is that SWORDSOUL can go into its entire combo off of a singular normal summon, and its biggest weakness is normally that normal summon is very easily negated through an imperm, through whatever. Now, KASHTIRA, naturally, like it does in most other hybrids, takes the pressure off of the core archetype by baiting out those negates early on into the turn, as well as now that it has its full set of support, enabling an entirely new end board for the deck as either A, a backup option, or B, a fortification upon its original end board. And it really does work absolute wonders. I don't know if this is going to be the final product. I think this is going to be somewhat approximating the final product. I think if I do make any changes, they're not going to veer massively from this template. Although, again, I wasn't able to test it for a super long time because we just had so many really good games that I needed to show some of them off before I kept on going. It's just really solid gameplay here, and the deck is not going to veer much from this ultimate template. The only things that may be changed is potentially Small World or bridges, anything like that, but the core of the deck will remain the same. So I'm not going to waste too much time here at the beginning. If you're new to the channel, or maybe you're not new and you just haven't subscribed yet, I would definitely recommend doing it. It is absolutely free. It's the best way of supporting the channel. It doesn't cost you anything. It helps me out. It helps you out. There's no reason not to do it. And like the video if you enjoy watching. And if you do want to show a little bit more support for the channel, maybe you've been around for a while and you want to show a little bit of thanks or a little bit of support for anything that you've gained, you can of course join the channel as a member as well using the join button, or of course the link in the description below. We also have links to our Twitter, Facebook and Discord in the description as well. We're now launching social media platforms and posts, as well as our TikTok page as well. We're also launching TikToks over there as well. Could be something fun if you're interested. If you're on those platforms, might as well give them a wee follow just to see the occasional thing pop up. But I'm not going to take up any more of your time here. Let's get into the gameplay. Alrighty, this first replay here is going to be showcasing some of the more powerful sort of power-ups to your end board that KASHTIRA brings to SWORDSOUL. So this is going to be ultimately like sort of what the deck aims to achieve. Our opponent tries to hit us with a maxi here. Luckily, we did have one of our 9 counters to the card, or 6 counters I should say, to the maxi. So we're basically in a position now where we're going to go forward with our play completely uninterrupted. Now this is going to function exactly identical to, of course, the Evil Eye KASHTIRA deck profile in terms of the ordering of the strategy, because you don't want to lock yourself out of various extra deck mechanics. Starting off with Unicorn, we're going to grab KASHTIRA Theosis. Now we're going to pivot into the SWORDSOUL line. Normal summon Mo Yi, use its effect to summon out a SWORDSOUL token, synchro summoning into the Grandmaster Shizao. Shizao then searches your deck, ideally for either Emergence or the SWORDSOUL Strategist. We already have Emergence, so let's grab the Strategist. We actually just draw into the Strategist off of Mo Yi, so that's like it wouldn't matter because we would just search for it instead. And so we just add a random worm monster. We grab SWORDSOUL of Taya here off of our Grandmaster just to give us something to discard for our long one. So that's totally fine. We're going to drop the worm, summon the long one and the token, going into of course our Baron de Fleur. Now we're going to go for SWORDSOUL, our Strategist here, inflict some damage. SWORDSOUL Emergence is going to search our deck for the Arch Nemesis Protos here. Now we're going to pivot into our KASHTIRA line, going Theosis to summon out the Fenrir. You've seen this line before in most of our KASHTIRA videos. Fenrir search Raise Heart, can activate the Raise Heart, summoning it out to the field before going into the KASHTIRA Shangri-La. Raise Heart then going to activate its effect, banishing Unicorn to boost its level up to 7. Shangri-La locking up a monster zone before we turn our Raise Heart into the Raise Heart, summoning it in defense. arch nemesis Protoss then coming out to the field as well. We're not going to use the effect of Protoss. We're going to declare fire, and we're declaring fire because if we declare dark, we're going to pop our own Erase Heart. If we had used this before summoning Erase Heart, we would have prevented ourselves from even summoning it in the first place. But by declaring fire, we're not losing anything because Shangri-La protects itself. It means our opponent can't summon a Shangri-La, they can't summon a Raise Heart, they can't summon a Strategist, they can't summon the Fire Makonko. That there's all of these fire monsters that are like not necessarily core to many strategies, but do definitely pop up. So it's not as if it's a useless call, but it's the only real call that doesn't hurt you. So definitely fire, I think, is the call in this type of situation. We're going to detach a material to protect ourselves. The Erase Heart then grabbing a material, boosting itself up to 3 materials already, so it is active and ready to use its banishment effect. We of course have the face down imperm as well, finishing off the board with a KASHTIRA Fenrir. We now have a monster negate, a banish on demand, plus a macrocosmos. Our opponent cannot special summon fire attribute monsters. We have the Shangri-La from the continuous card advantage. We have an Omni negate with the Baron de Fleur, and of course the imperm for the monster negate. And our opponent is not even going to attempt playing through this. They're going to try go for the field spell, grabbing the Fenrir, and they realize very quickly that they cannot win this game. They summon their Fenrir to get some sort of play going. We use the Grandmaster. We're going to banish a card from the graveyard. We're going to target that Fenrir, negate its effects until the end of the turn. That's going to trigger off, of course, the Erase Heart. They're going to try banishing our Baron, but they are negated, so it literally doesn't matter. Fenrir does nothing. Erase Heart getting attached another card to itself. They're going to go into an Erase Heart of their own. Before their Erase Heart can do anything, though, we're going to use our Erase Heart to banish theirs, getting rid of it entirely. We're going to grab another material. KASHTIRA Shangri-La is going to start locking up their zones again, and we still have a ton of interruptions on our board. And again, they cannot summon their Erase Heart. They're going to go for triple tactics talents here, going for the draw 2. I actually let that go because the draw 2 didn't seem overly detrimental to us. I have enough interruptions to where I was confident I could play through an additional 2 cards, so we let it go, making sure our Baron was still alive, and sure enough, they just scoop it up there. So they did make a small attempt to try and play through that, but that is an absolute monstrous end board, and it's not even really that difficult to get into, because the only things you need to make that happen is KASHTIRA Unicorn, plus a method of starting your SWORDSOUL combo. The most common beginning to that combo is either a SWORDSOUL Moyi with a revealable card in hand, or a Taya with a banishable card in grave. If you can get that, you're able to summon out that full board, which is absolutely insane. Really good showcase. Again, that's not all we're going to be showing off, though. We're not just going to be showing off the ultimate end board. I do want to show a little bit about how the deck plays through tough situations, and potentially some of the weaknesses of the deck as well. So let's get into game number 2. Alright, this game is going to be showing off a little bit about how the deck plays through very rough situations, as well as just showing off a little bit of justice. So we're playing against Weather Painters now. I know what you're thinking. You're looking at this and thinking, how could you possibly advertise a deck as competitive or in any way top tier if you're going to showcase it against a deck like Weather Painters? Well, these guys aren't exactly the stars of the show. I just want to show off some of the interactions, and as I'm sure you've now gathered, it's against that back row. They're going to open up with Anti-Spell Fragrance. That hurts, but it doesn't shut us down completely. We're going to start with the Fenrir here. Fenrir being met with Skill Drain. So we've got Anti-Spell Fragrance and Skill Drain. That's not great. So that's a very rough beginning for us. We're going to normal summon the Mo Yi. Then we're going to be met with Rivalry of Warlords, forcing us to only control one type of monster. So we're going to lock ourselves into Worms just because it gives us more flexibility going forward into the duel. I wouldn't want to lock ourselves into Psychic and not be able to do much with it. So we are going to swing in, take out his Weather Painter. We're playing through 3 floodgates. So we're going to need to see what exactly we can do off the back of this, and how does this deck break through these types of restrictions. Well, a large part of it is going to be Blackout. Now, I'm sure you're wondering why I chose those 2 cards. Well, Skill Drain, of course, was the most problematic of the back rows, and we did see him set a newly set card. We didn't know what that card was. I'm fairly confident I can play through these 2, so I decided to take out the unknown card just in case it turns out to be something that's awfully problematic, like a there can only be one would be super problematic, for example. We're going to flip up the Emergence that we set last turn, normal summoning the Taya, then Taya banishing Blackout from the graveyard, going to be met with a Max C. That's pretty bad. So Maxi being activated does hurt us an awful lot. Taya then is going to summon out a token. We're going to go for triple tactics first, grabbing a talent so we can use that potentially next turn. We're going to go for the Grandmaster Shizao here. Shizao going to activate its effect. We do allow him to draw 2 cards off of Maxi, but the card advantage generated by the Shizao does actually make it worth it in our regard. We get the mill one and we get to add one to hand. We're going to set the emergence to the graveyard, swinging in with the Grandmaster. Having that active monster to get on board does mean that if he does draw into any tricky weather painters, we do have the ability to negate them, and luckily for us, all the floodgates in the world weren't enough to stop us. So there you go. The deck has a ton of ways of playing through a bunch of different floodgates. I wanted to show that off because of the amount of different options that we had. So for example, we would have been in a position where we could have set up a Dragite to negate more floodgates as they were activated. We kind of went Boxia to shuffle all the floodgates back into the deck. There was a whole ton of options that we had for dealing with those types of boards, and I wanted to show off that the deck doesn't automatically lose to something as toxic as floodgates, right? Because that's what a lot of people complain about. A lot of people hate floodgates. A lot of people hate losing the floodgates. So if you want a deck that gives you enough flexibility to play around as many floodgates as possible, this is definitely not a bad place to start. Just something to mull over. Let's get into game 3. Alright, getting into game 3 here, and we're going to discuss one of the weaknesses of the deck overall in this particular matchup. Now, our opponent here is playing the GOAT Punk. Punk is, of course, one of the biggest decks on our channel. I can respect anyone who goes out of their way to play Punk, and they are giving us a good showcase of what the deck does here. They're actually putting up a good combo, playing through all the boards. If you want to know more about our opponent's deck and what they're playing and how to break down exactly what it is they're doing, I have a ton of videos on that deck, at least one of which will be linked in the little box up in the corner there. So if you're curious, you can click that little box either now or when you're done watching this video. But definitely worth giving a watch if you're curious about learning how to play Punks. So they're going to go through their full combo, which I'm not going to spend too long on because, again, I've covered it a million times in the past. We're here to focus on SWORDSOUL, right? So they're doing all their shtick, right? So they got a pop. They have their big play with the Amazing Dragon and everything. So what they basically have the capacity to do here is not only are we trying to play through a Maxi, they have a pumping a face-up card as well as the Amazing Dragon, which is going to be able to shuffle back up to 1, 2, 3 cards on our field back to the hand. That's pretty problematic. Now, one of the biggest weaknesses of SWORDSOUL in this modern economy is that it does by itself struggle to go second. Now, the KASHTIRA cards do patch a large part of that hole, which is a large part of why I love playing the KASHTIRA cards in this deck, because it patches a large part of that going second sickness. But in a hand like this, you are awfully dependent upon the SWORDSOUL cards, and it does get a little bit dicey. So we're going to start off with Cross Out Designator, banishing Maxi directly from the deck so we can stop him from drawing any cards upon the summoning of our monsters. That's going to be pretty important, but still, trying to dance around this Amazing Dragon is going to be very difficult. We're going to start with Mo Yi revealing Taya. We're going to be met with Ghost Ogre. He's not even going to wait until we summon our monster. We are going to have to hit that Ghost Ogre with Called by the Grave just to try and keep our card around, but that's not going to stop him. He's going to flip up the trap card, targeting Mo Yi yet again, determined to get rid of the Mo Yi. It does eventually get popped by the trap card, Ghost Ogre being banished and negated. Mo Yi's effect still resolving, however. We're going to summon out that token to the field. We're going to go for Emergence now. Emergence being met with an Ash Blossom, and just like that, as easy as that, not even going into the Amazing Dragon, this player has managed to shut down our entire opening turn. And that's one of the biggest weaknesses of SWORDSOUL as a whole, and why I think in large part it is falling off. I think it's lack of ability to go second. Now, you could of course make the argument that, oh, you're not playing Tenyis, and Tenyis are a large part of the going second board, and you're right to an extent. Kind of. They're okay for going second, and you can definitely set up some really funky and tricky situations, but they're not nearly as powerful as the likes of KASHTIRA Fenrir or just the KASHTIRA cards as a whole. The KASHTIRA cards do definitely patch a lot if you're going second sickness, but if you don't open any of them up, it can be a little bit rough. So I'm not going to sell this as a one for all, fit all, 100% win rate deck. That's not what I do here. There are weaknesses in the strategy. If you're going second, you're definitely going to want to veer more towards your KASHTIRA cards, especially opening up your turn. But again, I'm not going to talk too much about that here. Let's get into the actual deck profile where we can talk about it in a little bit more detail. SWORDSOUL KASHTIRA. Now, we've covered this deck a couple of times in the past, so for some of us, especially those of us who've been around on the channel for a little while, this is not going to be all new, but there are definitely new cards and new interactions that we need to be aware of. So even if you're, even if you've seen our previous deck profiles, it may definitely still be worth sticking around to hear this one, just so you can hear if there's any nuances or interactions or anything about the new cards that maybe you didn't consider yourself, or maybe you didn't consider when modifying or upgrading the existing version of the deck that you were using. So first of all, let's talk our auxiliary cards. We are, of course, playing triple Maxi, triple Ash Blossom. We've got that double Infinite Impermanence. We got Crossout Designator, Called by the Grave, of course, trying to stop Maxi in as many different ways as possible. We have triple Tactics Thrust, which I've talked about a great extent over several videos over here in the past. Basically makes any spell or trap, normal spell or trap, searchable in your deck, so long as your opponent has activated a monster effect during that turn, which gives you quick and easy access. We're playing 2 copies, but it gives you quick and easy access to the likes of your Lightning Storm, to the likes of Triple Tactics Talent, to the likes of your Imperm, all of those other cards, as well as to the likes of Small World, Theosis, Emergence, and all of these engine-based cards as well, which are all normal spells. Definitely something worth playing, bearing in mind. So let's get in and we'll talk about the actual core deck now. We're going to separate it into 2 segments like we always do. We're going to separate it into SWORDSOUL and KASHTIRA, so we've got a decent idea of both. So in terms of the SWORDSOUL cards, we are playing 3 copies of Mo Yi, 2 copies of Taya, 3 copies of the Incredible Ecclesia, 2 copies of the Strategist, we have 1 Vishuddha, we have 1 Protos, triple Emergence, and 1 Blackout. So that is our SWORDSOUL cards in the main deck. So let's talk about them a little bit more. Now the SWORDSOUL package is centered around 3 primary SWORDSOUL monsters that summon out tokens as part of their conditions. So we have Mo Yi, Taya, and our Strategist Longwan. All of these monsters summon out SWORDSOUL tokens as part of their effects, and these tokens are level 4 tuners, which is how you facilitate your synchro summons. And they summon these tokens in different ways. Mo Yi on summon is going to reveal a SWORDSOUL or a SWORDSOUL card or worm monster in your hand to summon a token to the field. Taya, as an ignition effect, is going to banish a worm or SWORDSOUL card from the graveyard to special summon its token. Strategist is different. In hand, this guy is going to discard a SWORDSOUL card or a worm monster to special summon itself as well as a SWORDSOUL token. So basically all of these cards are 1 card synchros. Where does Ecclesia come in then? So Ecclesia is a level 4 tuner in and of herself, which is very useful. If your opponent controls more monsters than you do, you can also special summon this card from your hand for free. That is very, very useful on a tuner monster specifically. And it does help going second a lot because its second effect is where it gets most of its utility. You see, as a quick effect, you can tribute this card to quick play summon any SWORDSOUL monster from your deck or the Fallen of Albaz, which we're not playing. But you can basically quick play summon the Mo Yi or the Taya directly from the deck. You can technically summon Strategist as well, but that's no good to you. So it essentially acts as an additional 3 copies of both Taya and Mo Yi. And considering it's special summonable going second, its level makes it perfect to work alongside your KASHTIRAs for your Second Camp Punisher. There's just an awful lot going for this card. I definitely think playing this at 3 is a good idea. So that's why we have it at the ratios we have it. We have Vishuddha, which is strictly here as a small world bridge. That's it. That's his only purpose. We have Protos. Protos then is a monster. Basically, it's a walking floodgate. You can special summon this card to the field by banishing monsters from your graveyard and field with 3 different attributes. Banish 3 monsters, all of which have different attributes. While it's face up, it can't be destroyed by card effects, and once per turn, you can declare a attribute of a currently face up monster. All monsters of that attribute are destroyed, and neither player can special summon monsters of that attribute until the end of the next turn. So it's a way of locking your opponent out of summoning an entire attribute of monster. Normally, you would declare Dark with this card, because this monster itself is dark. It can't be destroyed by card effects, so it's not going to nuke itself, and Dark is a very popular and powerful attribute within the game, significantly more so than pretty much any other attribute. Now, with this deck specifically, Rather than our regular Sword Soul deck, which we don't really play any of our dark monsters, we do actually play the Erase Heart as part of certain end boards, so you do want to be maybe a little bit cautious when using this card to declare dark. More often than not, I find myself declaring fire when I summon this card, because our Shangri-La also resists being destroyed by card effects through its effect, and there are quite a number of fire monsters relevant in today's meta that you would like to stop the summon of, so it's a way of generating some value without denying yourself access to key resources. So that's definitely something to consider. We have Sword Soul Emergence, which will basically search your deck for a Sword Soul monster, or if you control a synchro monster, you can grab any worm monster you want, ideally Protoss. And Blackout basically allows you to target a worm monster you control in any 2 cards your opponent controls and destroy all of them. This card also, when banished, will summon a Sword Soul token to the field, which is a nice little fallback to use off of Taya or your Grandmaster, or any other way really you have of banishing this card. But yes, it's a nice little backup, definitely. I should also mention something I did skip over initially. All 3 of our original posse here, the Longwan, Moyi, and Taya, all have effects that activate when they're used as synchro material. Moyi will allow you to draw a card, Taya will allow you to send from deck to graveyard a worm monster or Sword Soul card, and the Strategist will inflict 1200 points of damage. Pretty decent effects. They're not like game breaking or anything like that, but they are definitely very nice for chain blocking or just generally generating additional advantage. Getting into then our KASHTIRA cards. So we're running the 1 Rise Heart, double Fenrir, triple Unicorn. We have the 1 Theosis, the 1 Field Spell, the Pressured Planet, and the 1 KASHTIRA Birth. Pretty standard package overall here. This is just the standard cards we will play in most KASHTIRA hybrids. The triple Unicorn is of course your starter. So Unicorn and Fenrir can both special summon themselves to the field if you control no monsters. They're both level 7s, which is very useful. Basically with Unicorn you can activate its effect to search your deck for a KASHTIRA spell card. You're almost certainly going to be searching Theosis unless you already have it, or if you're in a really funky situation, sometimes KASHTIRA Birth is a solid secondary search target. KASHTIRA Fenrir, when on the field, will activate to search your deck for a monster. You're almost certainly going to be searching for Rise Heart, unless, again, certain odd situations, perhaps if you have access to KASHTIRA Birth, you might find yourself summoning a KASHTIRA Unicorn, whatever it is that's happening, right? But most of the time, Unicorn will search Theosis, and Fenrir will search for Rise Heart. Now, why exactly are you doing it in that order? Well, Unicorn searching for Theosis, you can then activate the Theosis to target the Unicorn to special summon Fenrir directly from the deck. Fenrir then will search for your Rise Heart. Rise Heart is a monster that can special summon itself to the field as long as you control another KASHTIRA monster, but it does lock you into Exceed monsters only for the rest of the turn, as does KASHTIRA Theosis, so you are going to want to be very careful for when you time this effect. If you have any intention of going through Sword Soul or Tinyu lanes with this deck before going into your KASHTIRA cards, you definitely want to do that first. So you will want to summon your Unicorn, search for your Theosis, then you want to hold on to your Theosis until you've exhausted all other avenues of play, and only then do you activate the Theosis to continue with your turn and finish off your KASHTIRA plays, because if you do it too early, you're not going to be able to synchro summon. So that is the one sort of clash that happens, but again, so long as you use your brain, practice a little bit, practice with locks, practice with timing, practice with orders, you will get it down. It is not going to be an obstacle. Again, literally all you need to do is summon Unicorn first, search for Theosis, and hold on to it until you have done literally everything else, and then come back to Theosis to finish off your turn. That's all you need to do, and if you practice that and you get that down, it's not going to pose any problems. You're not going to find yourself Exceed locked. You're not going to be locking yourself out of plays. You just got to use your brain sometimes, and it will work out for you, trust me. Now this guy is the oddball out in that this guy is a level 4. However, you do get to use his effect to banish a KASHTIRA card from your deck, as well as 3 cards face down off the top of your opponent's deck to then boost this guy's level up to 7. So he becomes a level 7, useful for, of course, your Exceed plays. KASHTIRA, Unicorn, and Fenrir also have additional effects. Unicorn, if your opponent activates a monster effect while it's face up, you get to look at your opponent's extra deck and banish any card in there face down. Very useful. Fenrir's is arguably more powerful, where if your opponent activates a monster effect while it's on the field, you get to choose a face-up card on the field and banish that card face down. So this guy is pretty passive Interruption, even just having him left on an end board, summoning him off of your Shangri-La, for example, makes this guy a pretty formidable interruption. Fenrir is definitely an extremely good card, especially going second in your turns, where you can basically just special summon Fenrir, and sometimes Fenrir by itself is enough to break boards, or at the very least, it's enough to beat 1 or 2 interruptions before you even get started onto the rest of your turn. Definitely something worth bearing in mind. So our spell cards then, Kashtira Theosis will just target a Kashtira and special summon another Kashtira with a different attribute from the deck to the field, but it does exceed lock you for the turn. Basically, that's your way of going from Unicorn into Fenrir, and then Fenrir into Rise Heart, blah blah blah. It does the whole combo. We know what the combo is, it was in the gameplay. Pressure Planet, it has a bunch of text on it, but basically it's just here to search your deck for Kashtira Unicorn. I'll simplify it for you. It has a whole bunch of text on it, some pretty neat effects in here, but the only effect you need to worry about is that on activation, you search your deck for a Kashtira monster, and the one you're going to search for 99% of the time is going to be Unicorn. If you already have access to Unicorn, then you're almost certainly going to search your deck for Rise Heart. It's that simple. Then we have Kashtira Birth, which has a couple of effects. First of all, you can normal summon level 7s without any tributes, which doesn't really come up super often, but it does unironically help you play through certain types of floodgates or through certain rough situations. So it's not nothing, but it's not exactly revolutionary. The next effects, though, are what make it genuinely good. So once per turn, you get to target a non-exceed Kashtira monster that's either in your grave or banished pile, and summon that monster back to the field. That's very useful. It does also have the ability, so long as you control a Kashtira monster, if your opponent activates a spell card, after the spell card is resolved, you get to choose 3 cards in your opponent's graveyard and banish them face down. So it's an excellent way of denying your opponent resources in the graveyard for a longer game. So the likes of Sky Striker, the likes of Runic, for example, in particular, will absolutely despise this card, as well as any other deck that uses the graveyard as a primary point of resource. And that's pretty much the entire main deck. The only card I haven't talked about thus far is Small World. This is a card that people are very to and fro from. I get a lot of resistance on Small World from quite a number of different people, if I'm being honest. Not a lot of people seem to be a big fan of this card, but anyone who I have convinced to test it has absolutely loved it. And I definitely think Small World is a large part of what makes this deck as close-knit as it is, because you can basically tag out any Kashtira for any SWORDSOUL and reverse, because what you'll do is Small World will basically bridge. It's a mouthful to explain. Small World can be quite difficult to explain. I might do a video on it, like this card by itself, if I'm being perfectly honest, just talking about this card. But essentially what it does is it lets you banish a monster from your hand. You check your deck for a card that has exactly one thing in common with it between attribute, level, attack, defense, and something else. Type, attribute, level, attack, defense, right? Type, attribute, level, attack, defense. Those are the 5 things. So you reveal a monster in hand. You find a monster in your deck that shares one of those things. Then you find another monster in your deck that shares one of those things with your new monster, and you add the 3rd monster to your hand. So it can be a little bit complicated whenever you're first using it, but trust me, just play it. It makes a ton of sense. It totally just clicks. And the reason it works super well in this deck is because everything can run through the level 7 Tenyis. You can run 1 or 2 of these guys. It doesn't matter. This will bridge anything to anything. That's the good part, because it only has one thing in common with basically all of your SWORDSOULs, right? It only has in common with these guys, it's typing. It's got a different attribute, a different level, different attack, and different defense. It's only got one thing in common. And it's also got one thing in common with all of your Kashtira cards. It's level. It's got a different attribute, it's got a different type, it's got different attack and defense. So it's got one thing in common with SWORDSOUL and one thing in common with Kashtira. So that means if you have a Kashtira in hand, you reveal it for Small World, you then reveal Vishuddha, you then grab a SWORDSOUL. If you have a SWORDSOUL in hand, you reveal it, reveal Vishuddha, grab a Kashtira. It's the perfect bridge. It just makes sense. Just practice with it. Trust me, if you're on the fence, if you're intimidated by Small World, if it's a little bit difficult to grasp, this is the easiest method of learning it. This is the simplest Small World exchange you will ever see. There is no this bridges to this, and this does this, and this does this. There's no complicated, there's no spreadsheet, there's no flowcharts. It is literally just reveal a Vishuddha in the middle, and you are golden. It's that easy. Trust me. But I'm not going to spend too long talking about that. It is basically just a bridge through the Vishuda. If you want to double up on this, or maybe you want to play a copy of Ashuna, which does literally the exact same thing. It has all of these same statistics in common with both. It is the exact same. It is up to you. But one is usually fine. Getting into the extra deck, we're not going to spend too long talking about the extra deck because most of it we very rarely use. So we have the Boxia. Boxia is a great card going second. Basically, when it's summoned, you get to target cards on the field up to the number of worms with different attributes used for its summon. So normally that's either, of course, going to be either one attribute or two attributes. So if you use Moyi and a token, well, that's one attribute because they're both water. If you use Taya and a token, well, that's two attribute because this is wind and the token is water. It's either one or two, right? If you use Moyi, it's one. If you use Taya, it's two. It's that simple. And it can also destroy a card in your field to bring back a level 4 or lower monster from your graveyard, and there's no restrictions on what that monster can be. So it can be an Ecclesia, it can be a SWORDSOUL, it can be a Rise Heart, it can be whatever, right? That's pretty handy. So Boxia, fantastic card, especially going second. Draco Berserker, a good generic level 8 synchro monster that is a worm type monster that is definitely worth noting. We're not playing a Shuna in this deck, so at no stage do we really get worm locked, which means Draco Berserker isn't as necessary in this deck as he is in some others. But I'm going to be honest, there's not exactly a ton of other level 8 synchros that give you a significant amount more benefit than the Draco Berserker. Basically, if your opponent activates a monster effect as a quick effect, you can chain and banish that card. Pretty straightforward. If it destroys an effect monster by battle, it will permanently gain that monster's attack points once per turn and gains an additional attack against the monster during that turn. So it gains attack point once, it gets an additional attack once, which means it's pretty damn good at wiping out boards and putting on a lot of offensive pressure. We then have Drag Out Witch. So long as you have a water monster in your graveyard, like your SWORDSOUL Moyi, this card will once per turn be able to negate the activation of a spell or trap and destroy that card. Pretty straightforward. We have the Grand Master, which is your primary level 8 synchro monster. You'll be using this basically every single turn. It has two effects. One that activates on summon, which allows you to search your deck for a SWORDSOUL card and either add it to your hand or banish it. Now, you will only ever banish Blackout to get its token. Anything else you will always add to your hand, ideally the Emergence or the Strategist, like we talked about in the gameplay. Its other effect allows you to banish a worm monster or a SWORDSOUL card from your graveyard or your hand in order to negate the effect of a face-up monster on the field. So if your opponent has a particularly problematic monster, it acts as a negate, which is absolutely amazing, especially in a format filled with KASHTIRA, because this being able to negate the effect of a card on the field means that if they summon a Unicorn, they're not going to get either of its effects. If they summon a Fenrir, they're not going to get either of its effects. So it does definitely pose significantly more of a problem than most other forms of interruption. It is worth noting though that you can only use either effect once per turn, so you get to pick one and use one effect that turn. If you search, then you can't negate, right? That's just something worth bearing in mind. We have the Baron moving into our level 10 synchros. We have the Baron for the generic once while face up, Omni Negate and Destroy, as well as the Ignition Speed once per turn, popping a card on the field. Really good generic card. Excellent going first to protecting you from the likes of Evenly Matched. Excellent going second because it gets to pop card and negate things like Nibiru, anything like that. So generally speaking, Baron de Fleur is an absolute godsend. The Supreme Sovereign is a really powerful card as well. It gains attack, 100 attack and defense, and reduces your opponent's monsters by 100 attack and defense for each banished card. It can protect itself from destruction by banishing a card from the graveyard, and if a card is ever banished from the graveyard while this card's face up, it can banish a card in your opponent's graveyard and one on their field without targeting. So this guy is an excellent out to many problematic cards because it's non-targeting banishment as well as passive attack and or defense reduction. We have the SWORDSOUL Sinister Sovereign, whatever that says. So this guy is pretty intense. He has 3 main effects. While he's face up, if you synchro summon another worm, you get to draw a card. That's neat. Doesn't really come up super often. But its other 2 effects are its main ones. So if your opponent special summons a monster, you can banish one of those monsters to inflict 1200 points of damage to your opponent. If your opponent activates a spell or a trap card or effect, you get to banish that card to inflict 1200 points of damage to your opponent. So not only are you getting a a lot of damage, each of those effects are once per turn, which means that you can inflict 2,400 points of damage to your opponent, 36 if you count the initial 1,200 from the strategist. So your opponent's down 3,600 life points already, which is sizable. That's a lot of damage. It makes going for lethal in a follow-up turn significantly easier. But it's also 2 interruptions. So we're in a format where field spells are everywhere, continuous spells are everywhere, continuous traps are everywhere. Being able to banish those cards before the resolution means that you're going to be able to essentially negate their effects. Having the monster banish on top of that is also really important. If your opponent special summons out a KASHTIRA Fenrir, you can just immediately banish that thing before it gets a chance to even be a menace to you. So both of these cards' effects are absolutely amazing. I would typically veer towards Baron de Fleur over the 2 SWORDSOUL monsters purely because it protects me from board breakers, but these 2 are definitely significant value and more than worth playing, absolutely. With the Psychic End Punisher here, which is primarily here to be summoned off of a KASHTIRA, as well as either a token or your Ecclesia if you're in a pinch. But the Psychic End Punisher, essentially, as long as your life points are equal to or lower than your opponent's, this card is unaffected by your opponent's activated effects, which is absolutely huge, of course. Once per turn, you can target a monster you control and any card your opponent controls. Paying 1,000 life points will allow you to banish both, which is huge. And lastly, at the beginning of the battle phase, if this card can gain attack points equal to the difference between your life points. So this means that this guy can get pretty damn huge. It really can. It's already at a base 35, which puts it above most monsters. But it very easily boosts itself up to insane levels of attack points. It's unaffected by activated effects, and it's, generally speaking, an absolute juggernaut. Very difficult to get rid of. Getting into your exceeds here, we have Big Eye, stealing an opponent's monster once per turn. Excellent card, especially in a KASHTIRA meta. We have Shangri-La here, which can protect itself from destruction by detaching a material from it. During each standby phase, you get to special summon a KASHTIRA monster from the deck completely free of charge and or consequence, which makes this guy fantastic at putting up additional interruptions, as well as maintaining momentum and bodies on board. It can as well, if you ever banish a card face down, utilizing the effects of Unicorn, Fenrir, a Rise Heart, anything like that at all. If anything is ever banished face down, this guy will be able to target any of your opponent's main monster zones or spell and trap card zones and lock that up until this card is, of course, dealt with, so that cannot be used. We have the Arise Heart, which is essentially Macrocosmos on legs. So long as this card's face up, any card that would be sent to the graveyard is instead banished. It can, of course, detach free materials from itself to target and banish a card on the field face down. And in terms of replenishing itself, if a card is ever banished once per chain, let me get that clear there, not once per turn, once per chain. If a card is banished, you get to target a banished card and equip it onto this guy as material. That does, of course, include banished cards face down. So definitely worth bearing in mind. And lastly, we have Zeus, because it's Zeus. Zeus is a pretty important part in any deck where you're playing things like Tactics or Big Eye that gets steal an opponent's monster or an opponent's Exceed monster, allowing you to summon Zeus on top of their card and generate you not only taking away their monster, but generating significant advantage for you. And that's pretty much the whole deck. Again, I had an absolute blast testing this. I'm not going to lie, I probably will make some small alterations to the deck as we proceed. Let me just bring it back up so you can get a full look at it, the hand traps and everything included. So this is the full deck list. Go nuts with it. I may make a couple of small changes going forward, but I'm going to be perfectly honest, I was very, very happy with how this list turned out, so I may end up just leaving it as it is, if I'm being perfectly honest. But that's everything I've got to say. If you got this far, you can of course subscribe to catch more videos as they're coming out. If you've watched this far in, you obviously like something, so you might as well subscribe, you know, it doesn't cost you anything. You can like the video as well if you got this far, just to show a little bit of support, or even join as a member below, but I'm not going to badger you any more. I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.